to help Aberdeen with the elections this year. I think I've trained a lot of you before, but my name is John Owen. I'm the trainer today. I've got over 40 years experience of organising elections, so I hope to be able to deal with any queries that you've got about the role that you'll be playing on polling day. I think most of you have used Teams before, but a few people are probably less experienced. So I'm just going to mention one or two things before we start. I think we've got about 50 people in the session this evening, and it will help if everyone can put their mic onto mute during the session until you want to speak. And if your internet connection isn't very good, you may find it better if you turn off the video. I noticed that most of you didn't have the video on for this session. We did have quite a few of them on for the earlier sessions. It is better for me if I can see you. It helps me to see you while I do the training. But certainly if you've got a bad connection on the internet, please turn it off. There is a chat facility in Teams, and you can put a question onto the chat if you wish. Kate is going to be helping me to monitor that. But for most people, it's easier to raise your hand. There's a hand icon on Teams you can use, and then we'll pick your questions up as we go through. But I will be asking for questions as well from time to time, and of course there will be a final session of questions at the very end. The session will last about 90 minutes, as usual, and we haven't supplied any handouts to you in advance. These will be sent to you after the session, so if you do want to make any notes, if you've got a pen and paper, then that will be helpful. So the important thing is that you understand exactly what we're talking about and that you know exactly what you've got to do. So please make sure you do ask if you are unsure about anything. So I'll just put the slides back up and then we'll start. Okay, so the objectives of the training are now on the screen. And we've got a mixture of presiding officers and poll clerks at each of our sessions. Most of you are experienced, but some people aren't, so we will be certainly covering the basics, and that helps you to remind you of the basic procedures and remind you how the presiding officers and the poll clerks will work together. So we'll get a basic overview of the election. I'll highlight the key points and make sure you're fully prepared for polling day. We'll provide some details of changes regarding COVID-19, and also I'll highlight any differences for this City Council election compared to previous recent elections. The last City Council elections were in 2017, so it's a few years ago now. So the COVID-19 mitigations are going to be more relaxed than they were last year. There is no requirement for distancing and there's no one-way systems required, but there will be protection for staff and voters. There will be some information posters. There will be protective screens, and there is a need for a thorough clean of the polling station before polling hours and after the poll closes. So cleaning materials will be provided as they were last time. There'll be hand sanitizer as well, and staff and voters will be wearing face coverings. As far as you as presiding officers and poll clerks are concerned, you do not need to wear a mask when others are not present in the polling room. So if the presiding officer and the poll clerk both agree and you're on your own, then you do not need, while you're sitting at your desk, to wear a mask. but when other people are in the room, then we do want you to use your masks, and masks are provided for you and for you to offer to voters if they aren't wearing a mask. So as you'll know, there's no requirement for people to wear a mask if they've got a reason. So we can't insist on voters wearing a mask, but certainly you can offer them one when they come in if they're not wearing one. So I'll go into a bit more detail about some of these issues as we go through. But I'll start now to explain the overview of the City Council elections. You can see there the 13 wards that we have in the city. Each ward has 3 or 4 members to be elected. That's a total of 45 councillors altogether, and they are all up for election this time. The voting system is the single transferable vote, STV. That's where they number the candidates in order of preference. And every local authority in Scotland is having elections this May. The ballot paper will look like this. This is a specimen. It's a white ballot paper, and the instruction at the top explains how to vote. Voters should number the candidates in order of preference rather than marking a cross against a single candidate. They can mark preferences for as few or as many candidates as they wish. So there are 7 candidates on this example, so they could mark them through from 1 to 7 if they want to, but they don't have to do that. They must put a 1 against their first choice, as I've shown on the screen. They can stop there if they wish, or they can add further preferences, as I've shown now, and they can put further preferences through to fill up the ballot paper if they want to, but they don't have to. So this is the STV system. It's a proportional voting system, and it means that the seats in each ward are allocated in proportion to the share of the vote that each candidate receives. So the calculation for that is done at the count. It's quite complicated. There is going to be an explanation of that in your ballot box if you're interested, and if you want to read it, then certainly it's there for you, but you don't have to understand it. You don't have to understand the detail to any of the electors. You just need to explain to them how to vote as explained at the top of the ballot paper. Any questions about any of that?
No.
Okay. So the Aberdeen Count is going to be held at P&J Live again. And the first thing that will happen is the unused ballot papers will be verified straight after the poll closes on the Thursday evening. And then the count will start on the Friday. The count is going to be electronic. So because of the complicated numbering of the votes, it's quite a difficult thing to do manually. So the ballot papers will be scanned in, and then the results for each ward will be declared by Fraser Bell as they become known during Friday. There are 70 polling places in Aberdeen and 124 polling stations. Each polling station will have 1 presiding officer and 1 poll clerk, except for 9 polling stations where they have 2 ballot boxes. These are where we've got 2 very small polling districts, and instead of giving them a polling station each, they are put together with 1 presiding officer, but there will be 2 poll clerks at each of those stations this time. So if you've worked there before, you'll know about that. But for most of you, it'll just be the 1 presiding officer and the 1 poll clerk at each polling station. And there are no information officers to be appointed at these elections. So you will be supplied with information to help you There's the handbook and the quick guide. You've already been sent a web link for those two documents, and you are required to read them and familiarise yourself with the main procedures before polling day. They'll also be provided as printed copies in your election materials on polling day. So the quick guide is really what it says. It's just a quick guide. It's got some short information. It tells you who can vote at the election, etc. And the handbook, it goes into a lot more detail. On the right hand side of the screen, there's another typed document that you will get as usual. This is the Aberdeen instructions, where we're able to give you any last minute or important points that we want to stress about specific issues in Aberdeen. So going back to the Electoral Commission's handbook, do read that carefully. You can use it on polling day if you've got a query before you need to contact the election unit. It takes you through everything you need to know. The second half of that book has got appendices that deal with the more complicated, more unusual procedures. But the first half of the book explains everything you need to know for all the basic procedures. And we've just been told by the Electoral Commission that they are going to be running a survey of polling staff on polling day. It's going to start at 2 p.m. on the day. And so on that handbook, there is a QR code. And if you have got a smartphone, then you can use that code to gain access to the short survey that they'd like you to fill in. So that's entirely up to you. But those are the three documents that will be able to help you on polling day. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so we'll look at
in the chat, John. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Someone's asking that they weren't sent the handbook or quick guide, and whether the links can be shared. Are they included in the stuff being emailed out, or will they get that on the day?
Well, okay, they would have been sent out by email to you, but perhaps if you could make a note, Kate, we could send that out with the other information after this session. Or otherwise, if anyone didn't get the link, if you get in touch with the election unit, I'm sure they'll send you the link again. Thanks for the question. So we're looking at the presiding officer role now. And of course, the presiding officer is in charge of the station and is responsible for the layout and the security of the ballot box, the ballot papers, and all the other important documents. That person needs to ensure all the proper procedures are followed and will instruct and supervise the poll clerk and ensure a secret ballot. So it is an important legal responsibility that is taken on by presiding officers. It's not too onerous if everyone reads their notes carefully and follows the procedures properly. So it must be taken seriously, of course. We also have PO1s, and these are the presiding officers that are in charge of the polling place where there is more than one polling station in the building. So those presiding officers are responsible for the place, although each presiding officer is responsible for their own polling station. They'll be able to mentor any inexperienced presiding officers. They need to make sure that the street lists are correctly displayed to make it easy for the voters to find the right station. And they will also control the activities of any tellers outside the building. And they'll also ensure that the cleaning that's required is undertaken. So it's down to everyone to help with the cleaning, but it's the presiding officer number one that will make sure that happens. And also the PO1 will receive the list of staff for that polling place. That will be in their ballot box on polling day, so they know everyone who is going to be turning up. the role of the poll clerk is basically to follow the instructions from their presiding officer. So they will assist the PO, and most of the time they'll be greeting their voters and checking them off on the register. But at some point they'll also be issuing ballot papers and marking the corresponding number list, because of course the presiding officer will need to leave their desk at some point during that long day, and at that point the poll clerk will need to issue the ballot paper and mark the CNL. So for that reason we ask presiding officers to swap seats in the morning when it's quiet with the poll clerk, so that the presiding officer sits with the register and the poll clerk can issue some ballot papers and get used to doing that process, rather than finding that they've been given that task at a busy time when they're not quite sure what to do. And the other staff member to mention is the polling station inspector. So these are appointed by the returning officer to ensure that everything is set up and running correctly. They'll be making some visits to you during the day, and they are there to help you. So they'll check the layout of the station, and they'll check that you are marking the register and the CNL correctly, and they'll just make sure that everything's running smoothly. They'll deal with any queues if there are any, and they'll also collect postal votes from you at some point. So that covers the roles of the staff. Does anyone have any questions about any of those roles? No, you're all fine. So I'll go into a bit more detail about the COVID-19 precautions now. First of all, if you are feeling unwell just before polling day or on polling day, if you have symptoms, then do not turn up at the polling station. So obviously we'd like you to give us as much notice as possible. So as soon as you feel as though you do have symptoms, please let us know.
Why is it fucking...
Oh, I hope everyone can mute their microphone. Yeah, so I was just saying that if you are feeling unwell, then please let us know as soon as possible so that we can get a replacement. If you're unsure if you're okay or not, then you can check the NHS website, and you can always contact the elections office for advice. But otherwise, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, as I've already mentioned, face coverings are to be worn when others are in the polling station. There will not be any visors provided this time. There will be, of course, the protective screens, and hand washing and hand sanitizer is provided. So there'll be hand sanitizer for you and for the voters to use, but there'll also be some proper hand wash provided so you can wash your hands properly. And then the final thing is ventilation. So we know that it helps to have some fresh air, and it's important that you've got doors and windows open wherever possible. Any questions about any of that? So most of you worked last time, and it's the same sort of arrangement.
Hi, can I ask a question, please? Sorry, I couldn't find the raise hand.
Yes, that's fine, yes.
I'm waiting to see a respiratory clinic at the moment. I've been left quite breathless from COVID, so I've actually stopped wearing masks this last couple of months. Will I be okay to not wear one? Should I ask the doctor for a letter of exemption, or what should I do? I've never been approached yet. I've only just stopped wearing them recently,
Okay.
but I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing it all day.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to ring the election unit and just inform them of that. But as I don't know if I've already said it yet, or I will be saying it, we can't insist on voters wearing masks, and obviously they might have reasons for exemption. So I would imagine it's okay, but it would be useful just to give the election unit.
Yeah, just to let them know.
That would be good. Thank you.
Okay.
Good question.
Well, what is the guidance on COVID test? Do you recommend testing before the election, or is it required, or what's the guidance on COVID testing?
Yeah, there's no requirement at the moment, is there, for anyone to do any testing? So we're not requiring that. It's the same as just the normal rules. While we're talking about that, I have been asked at some point in the previous sessions if the Scottish Government changes the legislation, which they've intimated they will on the 18th of April, I believe, then we are still wanting voters and staff to follow the procedures that we're setting out in this training now. So again, we can't insist on voters wearing masks, but you can offer them to them if they want one. And again, we want you to wear a mask when there are others in the room, unless there's a reason that you want to be exempt. If there's no other questions, I'll move on. So before polling day, you definitely need to know where you're going, of course. Most of you will have worked there before, but some of you will be new, so please make sure you know exactly where the polling station is. You don't want to be driving around in the dark before 6 o'clock if you're not sure where the building is. And do take enough food and drink. Again, if you're new, you've got to be there all day. It's a long day and you need enough to keep you going. You also need to know your station code. So this is the code that you've been given with your appointment. If there is more than one polling station in the same building, then you need to get the right polling station, and that will be in your paperwork. Because the weather isn't always the warmest in the first week in May, and because of the ventilation, it's important that you have some layers of clothing to keep yourselves warm. So I know most of you have worked before and you're well aware of that. The basics then on polling day are that we want secrecy and impartiality. So you've all been supplied with the secrecy notice that was emailed to you, and I'm sure you understand that you need to act impartially. Although you might be aware of that, sometimes you might just say something when you're talking to a voter or explaining how to vote. So just try to be careful with what you say. We want you to dress smart, but be comfortable and be warm. Do think as well about any slogans that might be on a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, because sometimes that could be misinterpreted as a political statement. So just think about what you're wearing. You need to be at the polling station by 6 AM at the latest. So this is a little bit earlier than sometimes we've had, because we've got to do a thorough clean of the polling station and make sure everything's set up to issue the first ballot papers at 7 AM. So those ballot papers will be waiting for you. Once you've got them, make sure that you've got everything and the key holder hasn't left until you know where the screens are and all of your paperwork. And then check that the paperwork is the correct items for your polling station, particularly in case we've made a mistake, in case we've given you the ballot papers for a different ward, or check that the numbers of the ballot papers that you've got are the right ones according to your ballot paper account, because those sort of things can make a big difference. So check those first and give us a ring if there's any problems. And we need you to have your mobile phone turned on straight away in case we need to get in touch with you urgently. And we need you to have a quick look at the building to make sure it's safe for the voters to come in. So if, for instance, there's some water on the floor, that could be a slipping hazard, or if there's a tripping hazard, there's been some building work, something done that's going to cause a problem, then we need to think about that. So there is some guidance in Appendix 9 of the handbook. So before 7 o'clock, we need to make sure it's okay for the voters to come in. Polling starts at 7 AM, and you will need to seal the ballot box just before 7, ready to issue the first ballot papers promptly at 7 if anyone's there. And as I mentioned, the polling station inspectors will be calling in they'll be making 3 visits during the day. So we'll have a look at the setting up of the polling station now. And I just want to mention that we aren't supplying any of those indicative plans and sketches that we supplied last year. So because we don't need a one-way system, then we are going to just rely on the standard layout. And you can see on the screen how that would work. So the desk and the staff are sitting in view of the entrance so that the voters can see where the staff are. And on the right hand side of that screen, there's a note that you will have in your ballot box that tells you where to display various notices. So it's all straightforward. It explains that on the outer or large A-frame at the entrance to the polling place, there you can put the station number signs and the street lists. And then on the totem pole, which will be at the entrance, perhaps just outside the room or just inside the room, if it's the polling station, you'll have the items that are listed on there. That's the station number, street list, specimen ballot papers, and all those other items, guidance for voters, etc. Then at your desk, there'll be a large ballot paper, the guidance for voters, pictorial guidance and translations. And then in the booth, there'll just be the guidance for voters notice. So just going back to the layout, the idea is that someone comes in to vote, they can look at the totem pole to get some information while they're in the queue. Then they'll go to the desk where the poll clerk usually will be sitting first so that they can be checked off on the register. And then the presiding officer will be able to issue them with the ballot paper. The ballot box is always within reach of the presiding officer. The voter goes to the booth to vote and then has to pass the ballot box on the way out. So we always make sure that the booth is positioned so that they can't just sneak out the door without going past the desk to give their ballot paper back into the box. And on this plan, you can see there's official paperwork behind the presiding officer and poll clerk. So if there is a spare table, the presiding officer can put the paperwork there so it's all laid out in the right order, ready to use. If there isn't a desk, I'd still lay out my paperwork on the floor so that I'm organised rather than having just a big pile of papers. So that covers the standard layout. So there is just the one ballot box for you, and the equipment that you'll have will include the collapsible voting booth. Those of you at multiple stations will be able to use the tensor barriers and also the roll of red and white barrier tape to try to separate the 2 or 3 polling stations that are in that room. So the idea is that we don't want someone to put a ballot paper into the wrong ballot box. If that does happen, then it's important that the presiding officer makes a note on their ballot paper account so that we're aware at the count why their box doesn't balance with the number that we were expecting. You'll also have one of 2 types of a hearing loop device, and it's important that you know how to use that. So don't wait until someone needs it before you start to read the instructions. You should have a look at that before while it's quiet in the morning so that you know what to do. And as I mentioned, do check that you've got the correct ballot papers and ballot paper account and CNL list that all match the ballot paper numbers for your polling station. And please flick through the ballot papers just to make sure the printing is all looking okay. If you've got some papers that are badly printed, then you'd need to let the elections office know, and we probably want you not to use those books if possible. Well, we certainly want to make sure you didn't use them if they weren't usable. And the final thing I need to say is that you'll have some pencils for the voters to use, and as we did last year, they won't be left in the voting booth. You need to just put out a few at a time on your desk, so that the voter can take one without touching too many of them. Just put a few out so they can take one away with their ballot paper, and then you don't need to get that ballot pencil back. So I think that covers the basic layout. I just want to mention two particular notices that are important. The guidance for voters, that looks like the one on the left. That is to go on the totem pole and at your issuing desk. And then the other notice is to go in each polling booth compartment. So that pictorial one is the only notice we want inside the booth, so that people read and understand how to use the voting system and what to do with the ballot paper. Oh, there is some more signage regarding COVID. Not as many signs as we had last year, just 4 different signs. These 2 are to be placed and used outside or at the main entrance. And these 2 are to go outside or inside, wherever necessary, to clarify the doors to be used and the routes to be used to get in and to get out. So there's only the 4 signs. So at that point, are there any questions about setting up the polling station?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, are we getting any arrows to put on the floor this time round at all? They were quite useful last time,
Yeah.
with entrance and exits.
Yeah, thanks, David. No, there isn't any requirement for one-way systems this time, and therefore there won't be that necessity. So there's no requirement for distancing. So I mean, presumably some people will want to, if there's a queue, some people will want to leave a bit of a gap between themselves and others, but it's down to individuals, as it is in everyday life. But that's a good question. Thank you.
John, we've got a couple of hands up. We've got Lisa Sweeting and Laurie Leslie.
Okay, Lisa, what's your question?
Yeah, thanks for that. It was more just of a reflection and observation from when I was presiding officer on the last elections. I noticed that my team, it's to do with when you're setting up the polling place and the polling stations, some of the list of addresses were actually split between more than one desk. So we encountered where members of the public would queue up, they'd come in and see their street name and queue up to my desk, and then it looked as if they weren't registered to vote because their street was on my list, but their house number wasn't. And it did take quite a few of these things happening, and the same that was going on in the other room as well, before we realised that it was a street had been split and some numbers were on one list and some were on the others. It's quite unfortunate because where we were at Inchbroom over in Garthdee, it was actually different rooms as well. So it was maybe just a pointer to everybody to be mindful when you're pinning the residential listings up on the polling, on the totem poles, just to have a quick check if any streets are split, and if it is, if more than one desk, if they were at least next to each other.
Okay, that's a good point. Thanks, Lisa. What you could do perhaps is mention that to the election unit as well for your particular polling station, because they might be able to do something about that on the signs. But of course the other thing is that if you can see that it's odds and evens, or it's after a certain number, if you could add something to the sign that says up to number 623, then obviously that would help, wouldn't it? But
exactly, because none of us were actually familiar with that area as well, so we couldn't even tell if it was a big long street where we had half of the street or the other, or the lower numbers or anything like that. So it was just something that I made a personal note to check when I was to do this again.
John, can I jump in there just briefly, very briefly?
Yes, of course. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. That's a very good point. Thanks for pointing that out. I just wanted to mention that the street lists that are provided that should be displayed on A-frames for each polling place. Where there's a split in the street, it should indicate the numbers that apply to each station. Now, granted, the voter might not pay close attention to those and just see the name of their street and go to the wrong station. But the street lists shouldn't just, where a street has been split, the street lists and the signs shouldn't just have the name of the street. They should indicate the numbers as well that correspond. But certainly, since you've raised that, we will keep a very close eye on the street lists that are provided to us to make sure that they do. Of course, it's not especially unusual for streets to be split like that. So, you know, it is relatively common, and sometimes they do have to do that. And I recognise it does complicate things a little bit, but make sure that this.
Once you know about it, it's not a problem. You know, it's just at the first few people that come in and you can't find their numbers, and it's maybe a queue, and you're thinking that they're not registered, and it was just a bit crazy until we realised what the issue was. And then we still couldn't avoid, you know, if the people had stood in a long queue, then having to queue again at a different station. But yeah, at least we were aware that there was this split of streets going on, and we could deal with it a little bit better then.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Lisa. I think someone else had their hand up. Can we have the next question?
Yeah, I had a question. My name is Laurie. Sorry to go back to the point on the one-way system, but I can see how, yeah, in the actual kind of polling station, that's fine. They tend to kind of move around a one-way system anyway, but should we, where we can, be using different entrance and exits in the building, or no, we're saying kind of no requirement for that, and if there is just one closer door, that people be coming in and out of that?
Yeah, I think we just want to use the usual system that's normally there, because there isn't that requirement at the moment.
Okay, yeah, I think I was with Lisa last year at Garth D, and we did have there are an opportunity to have an indoor and an outdoor. It does mean voters are having to go slightly longer kind of down the corridor to leave, but it did work quite well. So we can it's maybe something I can pick up directly with the elections unit just to see
Again,
in that instance. Yeah.
Again,
hi
that's
Laurie,
fine.
that's right. Long time no speak. Hey.
Yeah, I think generally specific things about specific polling stations, it's always worth sharing with the election unit separately. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Has
you.
Michelle got a question as well? There was a hand up there. Oh, it's gone. Okay. I did see while we were dealing with those that someone had asked whether someone can use their own pen, and of course that's okay as well. So when we're talking about pencils and picking up a pencil, it doesn't need to be returned to you. If someone wants to use their own pen, of course, they can do that as well. So we'll move on then to the next slide. And this is about the cleaning regime. So as I mentioned, cleaning materials will be provided, and all surfaces and touch points are to be given what we call a thorough clean just before 7 o'clock and also after 10 p.m. So you will have surface cleaner, which is an antibacterial spray, and also some paper rolls. And by a thorough clean, we want you to spray all the surfaces and touch points and leave them wet to dry naturally. So that's going to make it better to do it that way. And then those surfaces can be wiped down regularly, so perhaps on an hourly basis, or depending on the turnout, how busy it's been. From time to time, you can wipe down the surfaces that need to be sanitised, and you can do that with the microfiber or polyester cloths, so you can spray and then wipe them at that point. And those touch points would include, of course, door handles, the polling booth itself, where people are resting their hands while they're marking their ballot papers, any tables, the ballot box lid, and of course if there's a kitchen and you've been using that and touching the kettle, etc., then those sort of areas can be wiped over as well. So it's the PO1 that will take the lead in making sure that happens, but of course everyone needs to be involved. So moving on to sealing the ballot box. That box needs to be sealed just before 7 AM. So please show it empty. Try to show it to someone else who's not the poll clerk or other staff if there's somebody there. But if not, then the presiding officer will be able to get the poll clerk to verify that it was empty when it was sealed. And don't forget to record the serial numbers that you've used onto the ballot paper account. That helps us to prove that the ballot box wasn't tampered with after it left you at 10 o'clock on polling day. So then we'll move on now to who can vote. So you can see on screen, first of all, most of the electors on the register don't have any letters next to their name. They can vote at all elections. So that's the same as usual. This time there won't be any dates printed. Sometimes we have dates printed when a young person will become old enough to vote. This time the register is being produced so that it includes everyone who is 16 or over on the 5th of May. So the franchise marks that we're interested in are L and M. L is a peer, a lord. They are allowed to vote at this election. And M is a qualifying foreign national or a convicted prisoner. So if there's an M prefix, then someone comes in and gives their name, they can vote again at this election. The N and the P mark is not a franchise mark, it's just an indicator to tell us that someone is either an anonymous elector or that that person has appointed a proxy. So the anonymous electors can vote if they turn up, and a proxy or the elector themselves, whoever gets there first, is allowed to vote at this election. And the people who can't vote are just the A marks or the F voters. These are people who are postal voters because we've already sent them their ballot paper in the post, or overseas electors who are entitled to vote only at a UK parliamentary election. So we'll look now at the register to remind you what that looks like. And I'll just highlight a few points. First of all, the polling district. This is printed at the top of each page. This one is DG 0107/1. And that's part of the electoral number to be written on the corresponding number list. We've got all of the streets that will be listed in alphabetical order. And the right hand of each column shows the house numbers. This often goes up the odd numbers and down the even numbers, although sometimes it is consecutive. The elector number is shown in the left-hand part of the column. And you can see there that they are consecutive. There is one there that's got a slightly longer, different number. It's got a suffix number. That's because Mary Shelley's name was added after the register was first published and numbered. I've been told today that it's probable that people who've been added late may also have a number that's out of sequence. So you might find, I think apparently this happened last year, you might have had a few numbers that were out of sequence. So you just need to be aware of that. And we've pre-printed a line through people's names who shouldn't be voting at the election. So anyone with a postal vote, such as George Orwell, has been already pre-printed. You can see some more there. They've been already scored through to remind you not to give them a white ballot paper again. And then we've got a proxy. William Shakespeare or his proxy can turn up. They are allowed to vote. And there's an M there as well for Arthur Doyle. So otherwise, I just want to mention that if you can't find someone on the register, you should look at the very end of your register where there's a heading Other Electors. So it's always worth looking there to see if someone is there before you refuse them a vote. And it's important that the poll clerk, of course, understands exactly how to use the register. So presiding officers need to check that your poll clerk knows how this works. It's important that they understand that. So I'm going to now show you the register at the top half of the screen and the corresponding number list in the bottom half of the screen, so we can remind ourselves how we mark these documents. The first person to come in to vote is Seb Fawkes. He gives his name and he tells you that he lives at 13 Authors Way. So we find him, there he is. He hasn't got anything that stops him from voting, so we can put a line right the way through his entry. Now, the Electoral Commission's handbook says that we should just put a short line in between his name and number, but in Aberdeen, we prefer to put a line right through the entry like that, and then the poll clerk can call out the electoral number, which includes the polling district reference DG 0107/1 and the number, elector number 1281. The presiding officer can write that down on the corresponding number list and issue ballot paper 20501, and that's all you have to do to issue a ballot paper to someone. So you just repeat that every time. We'll do one more. The next person to come in is Chris Marlowe of 3 Arthur Lane. So he's okay to vote, nothing to stop that. So we can put a line through that entry, call out the number and enter that number onto the corresponding number list. So once you've entered the polling district reference a couple of times on that corresponding number list, you don't have to keep on repeating it every time. It's always going to be DG 0107/1. So you just can put the elector number down after that. But if you start a new sheet of corresponding numbers, then put that reference down a couple of times again. So that's the standard procedure. And then just to clarify the final bit of the voting process, what we want you to do is greet the voter. We can be pleasant, say, hi there, how can I help you? Step forward, please. Take their name and address, even if they've got a poll card. We need to confirm that with them. And then we don't want to take the card off them. There's a screen in front of you, so ask them to keep it and just check their details on the register. So as regards the poll card, if you've got a bin, then hide it or move it out of the way, because we really don't want to have the poll card back, please. We'd rather that they just take it away with them. And then once you've entered the electoral number, you can issue them with a ballot paper. We'd like you to fold the ballot paper once. That tends to help. Most people will just fold it once when they bring it back. Not everyone will, of course. Some of them will fold it 15 times, but most will use the same fold. That makes it a bit easier at the count. And also last year, I think we asked you to fold it off centre. Do you remember? We asked you to fold it slightly off centre, just to give a little lip. And that really did help us at the count. I was at the count last year, and it was really quicker to just open those ballot papers for us. As you hand over the ballot paper, we'd like you to explain the process. And because this is a more complicated process, you need to say the top of the ballot paper explains how to vote. If you just say that every time as you hand it over, the top of the paper explains how to vote, and also say to them, when you put it in the box, I need to see the printing on the back. That's you don't need to check that there is printing there every time or look at it. We just want you to say that so that the electors realise that it is an official ballot paper that needs to go back into the box. And then you direct the voter off to the booths.
A question from Derek Beverley.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yes, Derek.
I better unmute myself there.
Yeah.
John, good to hear your calm and concise delivery of how we should be doing things again. One concern of mine, over about 18 years of being working at elections, is the importance of the polling clerk to call out the elector's number and name. you know, just how important is that? Are there going to be observers in the polling station to, you know, so that, you know, personation can be established or that? Just how important is the calling out of the elector's number and name?
Yeah, I guess, thanks, Derek, it's a good question. The requirement is there because it's a legal requirement, I'm afraid, so it doesn't really matter who's there. I think that probably the reasoning behind it is, as you said, because if there are, well, yeah, no, there may be other voters in the room. And I guess that's an opportunity. If I live in the same street as you, or if this is a little village and everybody knows everybody else, then the opportunity is there for someone to realise that someone is trying to cheat. So I guess that's the reason for it. But even if there's no one in the room, just the one voter and you and the poll clerk, then the law says that that's what we need to do. So we just do that every time, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me again? Am I still on?
Yes, you're still on, yes.
Still on. Okay, I mean, the last time, must be 15 years now since I watched a video of how elections should be run at the Exhibition and Conference Centre, and it's been disappointing for me to find that a lot of polling clerks they don't want to call out the elector's number or name. You know, they just want to ask the voter their name, and they'll just cross it out and they'll tell the presiding officer. You know, it's disappointing for me to, you know.
Okay, I mean, I guess when I say call out, I mean it hasn't got to be shouted. It doesn't say it's got to be shouted out. It's just got to be called out, and obviously you've got to be able to hear it. So it doesn't, you know, as long as the presiding officer can hear it, that's the main thing, I think.
Okay. Okay. Point noted. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for your question. You can put your hand down there. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Here we go. I'm new to these things.
That's okay. Any other questions about the voting process? Okay, thanks. Well, anonymous electors, we mentioned them, and we don't have too many. It's just a handful, I believe, in Aberdeen. So you may get one come into your polling station, and unlike other electors who don't need a poll card, they don't have to have their poll card with them, other electors, but anonymous electors must bring theirs. It'll be in the form of a letter, actually, but they must bring it because they won't be giving their name and address, and their name and address isn't shown on the register. So we find them under the heading at the back of the register, other electors, and you're asked to see that letter. You don't need to touch it. Again, you just need to see it as you would with anybody else's poll card. So you won't be mentioning their name and address, and you just check at the back of the register. Their name won't be there. It'll just be an electoral number and the letter N, and that's what you enter on the CNL. So you just mark a line through the entry. So the entry will just be the electoral number and the N, and then you'll mark the number on the CNL, and you can then issue the ballot paper. So that's the standard procedure for that. So I just want to look now at who is allowed in the polling station and remind you of any requirements regarding those people. So of course the voters are allowed in, and of course you're allowed to be there, otherwise that would be a bit of a nonsense. But who are these other people who can come in? So I'll just show you that list now. There's the returning officer, and of course the polling station inspectors that I mentioned, they're allowed to come in. They've been appointed. But the other main category are candidates, election agents and polling agents. So I just want to discuss that a second. So we no longer issue authorisation cards to candidates and agents, but we do give you a list in your ballot box of anyone on who is a candidate or an agent who can come into your particular polling station. And then what you need to do, if someone comes in and says they're an agent, you need to ask them their name, make sure they're on your list, and then ask them for some photographic ID. So they've all been told that they must produce photographic ID. That could be a passport or a driving license. It can be a bus pass, just a works badge that has their photograph. So something that's got their name on and a photograph that looks a bit like them. That's basically what we're after. And then they're allowed to be in the polling station. The other people that can come in are the police, of course, and also representatives of the Electoral Commission or any accredited observers. Electoral Commission and observers, there's a special photographic ID that they'll have around their neck, and there's an example of that in the handbook, so you can check that's correct. Otherwise, we don't have a list of those because we don't know that they're coming, that we don't get told. And then there are any under 16s, of course, who are accompanying a voter, and finally any companions who are there to assist someone who has a disability. So that's the usual list of people. And I just want to mention specifically the polling agents. So polling agents are appointed officially by candidates to help them. They work on behalf of the candidates, so you will be checking their ID. They will be on a list that you've been given if they are entitled to come in. Now the law says that they can sit in the station, they can stay there all day if they wish to detect personation. That doesn't usually happen even in England. It does happen occasionally in England. I don't think it happens at all in Scotland. They're not allowed to interfere in the process, of course. Again, they are legally allowed to add their own seal to the ballot box at 10 o'clock. And again, I don't think that happens in Scotland, but it has happened occasionally in England. What they are most likely to do is they'll ask you what the turnout is. And this is where we want you to give accurate numbers. So if they do ask you, you can tell them exactly how many people have been in to vote. That's not against the secrecy requirement, because you're not telling them anyone's name or address or electoral number. You're just giving them a total that helps them. And then just to differentiate them between tellers aren't officially appointed. They are there to help candidates, but they stand outside and they are there to ask voters for their number. So they can ask for their number after people have been in to vote on their way out, but not the way in. And of course, they mustn't unduly influence voters or get in the way, preventing them from access. So they'd normally be outside. They could be inside if it was raining, if they're in a foyer area, but not where they can hear what's going on. And of course, if they start causing a problem, then they'll need to be outside. So they can't come into the polling station unless, of course, they want to vote themselves. So that covers the agents and the tellers and the candidates and everything like that. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Okay, so we've got a new slide about registration queries, and I just want to clarify the difference between the returning officer and the electoral registration officer. So the election is organised by the returning officer. So it's the returning officer that runs the election. The returning officer appoints you and declares the result. But the register is produced by somebody else and different staff in a different building. And it's the electoral registration officer that does that, or the ERO. So we give you the telephone numbers for both the returning officer at the election unit and also for the ERO. And we just want to be clear about the difference between the two. So if someone comes in to vote, if for instance they are from 43 High Street and you do have High Street, but say for instance you've got number 41 and number 45 but there's no number 43, or say you do have 43 High Street but their name, somebody else's name's down there but not their name, then what we want to do is we want them to ring the ERO because it looks like they're not on the register. and they could get their name on the register on polling day even if staff have made a mistake. So it's important that they do ring. If staff haven't made a mistake, then they may not be able to vote on polling day, but they may be registered somewhere else, and of course we may be able to get them on the register for the next election. So we want them to ring the ERO, but don't give them the returning officer's number because the election unit can't help them. The other thing that might happen is that you might not have High Street at all on your polling station, and you might send them, or you could ask at the other polling station in your polling place, and they might not have High Street either. If that's the case, then again it's the ERO that needs to be contacted, but we don't want them to ring, we want you to ring, so you can ask the ERO where that address should be voting, because the ERO can tell you which polling station that voter needs to go to. So that's what we'd like you to do. It's basically being clear about when we're sure that they are on the register or not, and finding out if they can be registered. Any questions about that? Okay, the other thing that the ERO does, the ERO deals with absent voting issues. So if someone wants to apply for an absent vote, that could be a postal vote or a proxy vote, then they need to apply to the ERO. And if someone wants a postal vote in future, if they come in and say, oh yes, I've come in to vote, but I really want to vote by post next time, then it's the ERO. And if, for instance, I came in and I said, oh yes, I'm here to vote, but my wife is isolating today, so she'd like to vote, but she can't because she's isolating, then please tell me to contact the ERO, because I might be able to sort out an emergency proxy on polling day if she is isolating. So it's the ERO that deals with that. But it's the returning officer that issues postal votes for the election, because we've got the ballot papers, we send the postal votes out. So if someone comes in and they say they didn't receive a postal vote, or they've lost it or spoiled it, then in that case it's the election unit. So I know it's a bit complicated, it's the two different hats that are worn at an election. So one's the returning officer and one's the electoral registration officer. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on. Customer care is important, of course, and we want you all to be professional and to be helpful and to put the voter first. But of course, you can't take that too far. You can't give a ballot paper to someone who's not on the register, so you must still follow the election rules. So try to calm people down and try and tell them what you can do. So if you can't give them a ballot paper, at least you can tell them that if they phone the ERO, they may be able to get on the register for next time. So have a look at your handbook if you're unsure about anything. But otherwise, if you are in doubt as to what you can do, then you can always contact the election unit. And as well as helping all the voters, we also want to provide access for disabled voters. So make sure there is a clear access to the building and inside your polling station. There will be a hearing loop, and as I mentioned, you need to make sure that you know how that works. And of course, you can help someone to mark their ballot paper if they have a disability or they can't read, and someone can bring a companion to help them as well. So do offer help if you can. There's also large print ballot papers, and there's a tactile voting device that you can have on display. Make sure you know how to use the tactile voting device. I've asked before how many of you have actually used that device, and a few of you had. So it would be good if you know how to use it, because then you're more likely to be able to offer it to someone if you think that they're struggling with their sight. So I'm just going to show you a video now. We've got a video of how to use that device. There's no sound, there's no audio on this short 2-minute video, but it's got some subtitles, so I think you'd be able to follow it okay. Okay, so I hope you were able to follow that all right. It's the main thing about this is that the big difference it makes to people, because if someone has got to tell their companion or tell you who they want to vote for, it's not the same as everybody else because it's a secret ballot, isn't it? So if you can offer that device to someone, it means they can vote in secret. So it's pretty simple. You just need to offer it to them, and then you line it up with the boxes onto their ballot paper, tell them that the boxes are numbered, and then you have to read out to them in order all the candidates' names, and then they're able to mark their choices onto that, and then you can tell them they can take off the template themselves and fold it so that it's not seen, and then it can be, the ballot paper can be put into the box without you knowing who they've voted for. So that would be good, wouldn't it, if we could do that? Any questions about it? Okay. Photography in the polling station. We do have some no photography signs, so we'd like you to display those. For some reason, some people like to take a selfie of themselves with their ballot paper. Depends on the election, I think, perhaps, but if they do it, they could be committing an offence. So we'd just like you to point it out to them, that say, oh, look, you know, if you do publish that photograph, it might be an offence because it's a secret ballot. That's the reason why they shouldn't be doing it. So just point that out to them, please. And postal votes can be handed in. The idea of a postal vote is that it's posted back. That's what people should do with them. But for some reason, they like to bring them into the polling station. And depending on the election type, it depends whether we can accept them from different areas. So for this election, we can accept them for any Aberdeen ward. So you just need to check the envelope. Then that will go into the black wallet. And then at some point, about 6 p.m. Ish, it'll be the third visit of the inspector. They'll take out of that wallet any postal votes that you've got, and then they'll leave the wallet there with you so that you can put any further postal votes in that you get up to the close of poll. And if you want to know what the which ones you can accept, you can see this is a postal vote envelope, and it's got the address of the returning officer on there, which is Aberdeen City Council. So if it's for Aberdeen City Council, it's one of ours and we can accept it. If it isn't for Aberdeen City Council, then it's we need to refuse it because we can't do anything with it. We won't be able to count it. So postal voters who are marked with an A can't be given another white ballot paper at the polling station. So if someone comes in and they want to vote, then what you should do perhaps is ask them if they've got the postal vote at home, because if they want to go home and fill it in, then they can bring it back to you, because you can't give them another white paper. But if they say, no, I've never received a postal vote, that's why I've come in, or I did get one but I've lost it or I've spoiled it, then you can't give them a ballot paper, but we can give them a replacement. So what you can do is send them to the election office. They need to get there before the close of poll. So as long as they get to us by 10 p.m, we can give them a replacement and they can fill it in straight away. So that's the procedure. If they say they don't want to do that, then the only thing you can do is offer them a pink tendered ballot paper. But that's not really going to be the answer for them, because that doesn't go into the ballot box, and you need to tell them that. You could tell them it could be counted if it went to an election court, it was a very close result. But generally the best thing for them to do is to get to the townhouse so that we can give them a replacement. Okay, I think Derek Beverley might have a question. Yeah, you're on mute again, Derek. Sorry.
Yep. Hello there. Can you hear me now? You can.
Yes.
Okay. It's just, you know, if someone comes in at 10:15 and they've got a postal ballot for Inverurie, you know.
Yes.
I mean, you know, what do you do to them? You know, I mean, if it was me, I'm gonna take it anyway, and say, you know, I'm unsure if it's going to get there in time, or I'm unsure if it's going to count. Is that not the best way forward?
Yeah, it probably is, Derek. I mean, common sense would say, yeah, that is the thing to do in that instance. And although we don't want to advertise it because we might not be able to in all circumstances, we probably will be able to get them those votes to Aberdeenshire because we're sharing a count venue. So certainly follow the advice that John has just outlined and specify that we're accepting votes for Aberdeen City. But in circumstances like that, yes, I would be inclined to take it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Derek. So the other thing to mention is emergency proxies, which I've already touched on. And just to clarify, and also clerical errors, because these can be dealt with on polling day. So if there have been any clerical errors or emergency proxies in the few days before polling day, then we may have altered your paperwork already. But otherwise, because they can be given on polling day, it could be that someone turns up with a letter or an email that they've had from the ERO, and you might not have a copy of that information. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to ring the ERO to confirm that this email is correct and that person is allowed to vote. And of course, because of COVID, we may find that we do have an increase of those sort of emergency proxies given on polling day now. And the last special sort of procedure is the tendered ballot paper procedure. So this would normally apply more likely when someone comes in to vote and you've already got them marked off on the register. So the first thing to do is to wonder whether you've made a mistake, because it's likely that they probably haven't been in to vote already. So just have a think about that. And it might be you remember that someone's marked it against the wrong entry. It's unlikely though. So in that case, you're not allowed to give them another white ballot paper. You have to explain to them that they can only have a pink one. And the first thing to tell them is that I can give you a pink paper, but I'm afraid it can't go into the ballot box. It has to be given to me because the law says that it looks as though you've already voted. But tell them that it is still worth them voting, because although it won't be counted immediately at the count, it's important for them to express their opinion on the ballot paper, and that if the vote was close, then an election court would need to look at all the ballot papers, and that's when the tendered ballot papers would be taken into account. So it is still worthwhile using that pink paper. And then if they want to continue, then of course you can go through the process. If they think it's not worth it, then of course that's their choice. But it's better to tell them that up front before you hand it over to them, before you don't want to give them it and then tell them it can't go in the box. So the procedure's there. You have to ask the prescribed questions, and then the ballot paper has to come back to you, not placed in the box. You write the name and number onto the folded tendered ballot paper, and it goes into an envelope. If you're not sure about any of that, then you can always check with the elections unit. So any questions about any of those procedures that we've covered? You're all okay?
John, Derek's got another question by the looks of it.
Oh, so is that a new hand?
It is, John. It's me again. Sorry to be troublesome tonight.
No,
but
it's always good to have a question.
Okay, so for those presiding officers and polling clerks who haven't done the job for for a long time, am I right in thinking it's only the presiding officer that can ask a prescribed questions?
Yes, I think it probably is. I'm not 100% sure. It'll tell you in the handbook, Derek. But I mean, you'll be there, so obviously that would be the right thing to do.
Yeah,
I've got a feeling that. Sorry, I'll put my camera on. I think that the only thing that a presiding officer can do that the poll clerk can't is exclude someone from the polling station.
Yeah,
Does that sound familiar?
it does. Yeah, it does to me.
Okay. I'm okay. I'm havering in this here. It's just if the presiding officer's away having a break, does the polling clerk have to go and get him or her?
Yeah, I think that if it gets to a attended ballot paper position, I think the poll clerk should come and get the presiding officer. I think if I was the presiding officer, I'd want to be disturbed while I'm having my break, because attended ballot paper is unusual and it's an important procedure. That's my personal view.
John, before David Gow, I believe, was the returning officer, our previous returning officer told us that if we issued a pink ballot paper, we would never work at an election again.
Yes, of course. That was Crawford's view. Absolutely. We all remember that. Okay, has Yvonne got a question?
Hi.
Hi, Yvonne.
I just wanted to, it's not really a question, it's just to point out something that has happened when I've been presiding officer before. We've had two gentlemen from the same household with the same name, which caused a little bit of confusion. They had the same initial, but one of them was marked on the electoral register with just his initial and the other one with his full middle name. And we got the wrong one. The numbers didn't match on the tickets that they brought in at separate times.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was just to point out, if you just watch out, because it is an unusual thing. I think it's fairly northeast. The dads and sons and mums and daughters sometimes have the same name, and it caused a little bit of a stooshy when the chap, we weren't quite sure what to. We eventually sorted it out, but a pink slip was issued, and I am evidence that you do get a job again.
Okay, well done. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that will happen, of course, and that's where you'd need to be thinking, has someone marked against the wrong name? That's possible. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Oh, Derek. Yes, Derek.
Yeah, I'll unmute myself. Just a reminder to polling clerks that the last contributor there, she was saying that people from the same family will come in with similar names, and if we mark someone off the register by mistake, and we can establish that we write the word stat against the crossed off line, and then remark them, and then if the original person comes in, we score off the word stat, and we put a line through their name, because it does happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks very much.
I think you have to be absolutely sure that it's the appropriate thing to do, and that you do it at the time. I think there's a great danger in going back and trying to rectify mistakes like that. So I think that one has to be done as you do it, rather than going back and doing it.
Yeah, that's fair enough, David. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. So that's all those special procedures covered now, and we're moving on to the end of polling day. So managing a queue, we're not expecting big queues at this election, but we never know. So if there is a queue, then just before 10 o'clock, you need to check that everyone in the queue is at the right polling station in case they need to go somewhere else. They won't have long. And then at 10 o'clock, we suggest that you bring everybody into the room, or at least into the building, so you can close the door at 10 o'clock. And then we know that no one else is going to be allowed in. Everyone inside will then be allowed to vote. Now with COVID, what we don't want you to do is jam everyone in like sardines. So if it's going to be a bit uncomfortable to get everyone in, then the best thing to do is to use a member of the team to stand at the back of that queue instead, and make sure that they're at the back of that queue at 10 o'clock precisely, and then the queue can work its way through. After 10 o'clock, we can issue the ballot papers, and we know that when we get to the person who's our staff member, that there shouldn't be anybody else behind them, and if there is, they were there after that time. So that's the standard procedure. And of course, just to mention, if someone in that queue had a postal vote with them, then of course they can hand that in as well, as long as they were in the queue before 10 p.m. And then when we do close the poll, then we can close the door to stop anyone else from coming in. We can seal the box and finalise the paperwork, including the ballot paper account. We're also going to be doing a thorough clean, as I mentioned before. So again, we'll be spraying wet and letting it dry. And then the ballot box and the other materials will be collected from us. So just to mention a couple of paperwork issues that happened last year. Most of you, of course, do fill in all your paperwork and deal with everything correctly. But we did have a few minor incidents last year that I'm going to mention. First of all, when you're packing things away, there's a yellow envelope. There are 4 items that can go in there, not just the register. There's the marked copy of the list of proxies. That should go in there. And if you've had any emergency proxy appointments, they need to go in there, as well as any other clerical error amendments. So do make sure you put everything in there. There were a couple of instances where that wasn't the case, I believe. So please don't dispose of any paperwork. If you're not sure about it, don't just throw it away or put it in the rubbish. We'd rather you return everything to us so we can find anything that's been mislaid. And do sign off all of your forms. Even if it's a nil return, if it's been unused, we'd still like you to sign it so that we've got everything signed off. There were a few ballot paper accounts that were either incorrect or incomplete. So do remember to always fill in the tendered part of that ballot paper account, and be careful in filling it out. So I'm going to go through the ballot paper account very shortly anyway. So it's just that these issues can cause problems at the count. So I'm sure that you will do your best as usual. This is the packing checklist that I was talking about. It makes it pretty easy. All the things are colour coded. So as you can see, the yellow envelope should have 4 items, up to 4 items, if you have had lists of emergency proxies and clerical errors. So all those items that are coloured go into the different envelopes, and they go into the clear wallet. That clear wallet goes into the large clear sack, along with the hearing loop and any unused ballot papers. And then you hand that to the ballot box collectors, together with separate items, which are the ballot paper account and also the black wallet for the postal votes. So it's pretty straightforward. Any questions? So I'm going to take you through the ballot paper account then. And as you can see on that example, there are 2 of those boxes have already been pre-printed. We've told you how many ballot papers we've given you, 500 in this instance, and we've told you the serial number that was on the first ballot paper. So you've got to fill in those other boxes. The first box to fill in is box B, which was the number on the back of the next ballot paper to be issued. So when we say the next ballot paper to be issued, we don't mean the last one that you just issued, because that would be the wrong number, we'd get the wrong total. We want you to look at what the next ballot paper number is. And in this instance, it's 22727. So we put that in there, and that allows us then to calculate box D, which is B minus C, and that's how many ballot papers you've issued altogether. So 227 minus 22501 is 226. Then we need to know how many spoiled ballot papers you issued replacements for. And in this example, you will have issued 3 replacements. And then one of the most important numbers we want, because this helps us at the count, is box F. This tells us how many ballot papers went in the box. It's the number that you've issued, excluding the spoiled. Now, I don't have a calculator with me, but I'm going to try and use my mental arithmetic to work this out. It's 226 minus 3. I don't know if you can beat me with the answer. It's 223, I reckon. So that's the number that we'll be looking for at the count. And then the final number is the unused, which you calculate as A minus D. And A minus D is 500 minus 226, which is 274. Now, as a double check, what you can do is, once you've worked that out, you can look at the number that you've got left and see if you do actually have 274. Because if you don't, it could be that you've made a mistake on your maths, or you put the wrong number down under box B. So do a double check, and then that will help you to get it right. So that's all you've got to do for the ballot paper account. It's very straightforward. I'm sure you'll get it right. And one of the last slides now is the contact numbers. So we give you the elections office numbers for David and Stephen. There's a landline and there's a mobile number. We don't want you to give those to the public. That's a number for you to get through quickly, so you can speak to them if you have a problem. The next number is the ERO number. There's a landline number there that either you or the voters can use if it's a query that relates to the register or absent voting. And the last number on there is the elections helpline for the public, which ends 521. So those numbers will be on the slides that you'll get after this session, and it'll also be in the ballot box for you. So that brings us to the end of the training session, and I'm going to take any questions now. So I don't know whether Derek has any for me, but others may have some.
I'm having a little laugh here, John. Yeah, I seem to be asking all the questions. But
before, sorry to interrupt you, Derek. Before I do that, I want to mention to everyone that we're now going to let you have an online feedback survey, and that Kate's going to put that in the chat. So if everyone can look in the chat and click on that link, there's just a few of the standard questions we like to ask you at the end of the training. And then while you're filling that in, I'm happy to take any questions, and then we're going to send you the slide handouts after this session as well. Okay, over to you, Derek.
Okay, John, everyone, I was just wanting to ask that what happens at the count, not having done a count, if the ballot papers don't match the ballot paper account?
Okay, yes, yeah, that's a good question. So what we do is the first thing we do is we open the ballot box and tip out the papers and count how many are there. We're not looking at the crosses or whether they're valid, we're just counting them. It's called the verification stage. And we don't tell the counting assistants how many we're looking for. We keep that a secret. I've got hold of the ballot paper account. I'm looking for 274, but I don't tell them that. And then if they say to me it's 273, I have to ask them to count it again. And then if they get 272, that's even worse. And then they've got to count it a third time. But sometimes it doesn't make any sense and it's out by more than that. And that makes it more difficult. Then we have to stop counting, and then we've got to go away and look at other things. and it delays everything. So that's the basic sort of process involved.
So John, how often is the ballot box numbers out from the count? You know, what should be in there.
It just varies on the quality of the counting staff, because sometimes they get it wrong and they've got to count it again.
Yeah.
And sometimes it varies depending on the quality of the presiding officer, because they've filled in the account wrong. So it's really unpredictable, because, you know, a lot of people will do it right every time, and then sometimes they get it wrong.
Okay.
Good question.
You don't have councillors, or you don't have councillors leaning over your shoulder saying that, that box is wrong. And
they're more interested when we start to open the papers up and look at the crosses, really, and arguing about that sort of thing. But at the verification stage, they like to look at the papers to see if they can see if they're winning, but they don't tend to get involved with seeing if the numbers are balanced. They let us get on with that.
John, I understand it's late, so I will keep this very brief. It's just when I hear a question about why are ballot paper accounts important, I just can't stop myself. So I will keep this very brief. The thing is, Derek, it's about in general terms, it's about the integrity of the election. It's about us being satisfied that we have all the ballot papers that we are supposed to have at the count. That the numbers add up, that we've got what the presiding officer signed off, that everything is in order. And the effect that it has on the count is significant. Accurate ballot paper accounts save us an incredible amount of time, or to look at it another way, inaccurate ones cost us a lot of time and a fair bit of stress as well. It's common for ballot paper accounts to be a little bit out, one or two. That takes a little bit of time, and it's not uncommon for ballot paper accounts to be significantly out, and that can take a significant amount of time to resolve. So when you multiply that by the 100 and something that we have, you can see that it does affect what happens at the count significantly. So the point of saying all that is just to stress to you all, you really do help us a great deal by keeping a close eye on those accounts and trying to get them bang on, trying to get them accurate, because that makes a big difference for us at the count. Okay, thank you.
Yep. David, if I just could come back in here, having been a presiding officer for 15, 16 years anyway, I would find it quite useful if the election unit were to get back to me and say, Derek, you were one out in that last count, or,
okay.
Because I can't believe I've gotten it, I can't believe I've got it bang on every time.
Yeah.
But, it's something that might be useful for our presiding officers,
That's a very interesting suggestion, Derek. Well, I'll definitely take note of that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions from anyone? Okay, I think one or two people have had a problem getting the link. We've had that before, so that will be sent out to you as well. So otherwise, if you've finished your survey, then I can put the last slide bit on and say thank you for attending, and good luck on polling day. I hope it all goes smoothly, and I hope it's a nice warm day for you as well, with all those doors and windows open. So if you're finished, you can end the call now. Otherwise, I'll stay here for a couple more minutes while everyone finishes off. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I don't think I've got the link. I'm just trying to look for one and I can't see one.
Yeah, you need to click on.
Bye.
That's okay. You need to click on the chat. If you can see the conversation, then there's a little column comes up that should have the link on there.
I can't can't see
But
it.
if not, don't worry, because it will be sent to you with the slides.
Okay, so I can complete it then.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
sent.
can't get the link.
Okay, so I can't find it.
Okay.
Right. Oh, I think I found it now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Is everyone else okay? Are you still finishing off? Or
Yeah.
can't you find the link?
I have found the link. I'm just finishing it off. Yes, thank you.
Just while we're waiting then, Kate, I'll see you again on Wednesday morning, usual, about
Yeah,
9:30, I
problem,
guess.
John. No problem.
Okay.
Did you hear me all right, John?
Yes, yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yes,
No
good. I'll
problem.
speak to you then. Thanks. If you don't mind sending me some more feedback for the other sessions, then that would be good as well, please.
No problem. I'll do that first thing in the morning if that's all right, John.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem.
How do I come out? Is it finished? Is it?
Yeah, it's done. Just do it.
Okay. But this is still green. Why is it still green?
Come out.
What?
Their email.
Sheila and Derek, are you all right? Yeah, I think they've upped and left, have they? Right. Thank you very much to both of you.
Okay. Thank you for your contributions.
No problem. I'm going for a lie down now.
Yeah, Kate, listen, I'm really sorry about that.
No, you're right.
What was going on tonight with all those
I don't
queries?
know. Sorry, I'm really dark. It's gone dark in here.
That's okay.
I'm not sat in a cupboard, honestly. Yeah, I don't know what was going on. People couldn't access the links for some reason. I think what the problem is because, you know, when I've got to send the invites out because of GDPR, I've got to send them out as attachments rather than an email with a link on it.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people that are not used to Teams are struggling to find the correct link. So I don't know. I mean, I can bring that up once we've done all the sessions to see if we can go around it another way for next time. Because I had a chat with Derek, and that's obviously what happened last time, wasn't it? There was an issue with GDPR and data protection with people's emails. So I followed the instructions that he gave me. And I think a few people have got confused. So as soon as they've got in touch, I've managed to send them all a link. 99% of them got on. There was 2 that I couldn't get on, but I've booked them in for Wednesday.
Right.
And I've arranged that. And if that doesn't work, I can send them a recording. So
Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
so
great.
yeah,
Thanks a lot.
I'll get them. That's okay. It's just